November 1941, Kenley Airfield. The paper is thin enough to see the watermark when the light hits it. Typewriter letters bite into the fibers, each stroke a tiny bruise. On the top margin, a coffee ring. Down the left edge, a thumbprint of graphite where someone dragged a pencil and changed a number. Engine failures during -G dives, 38%. Cause, unresolved. That single line sits in a test summary like a nail through wood. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. Every pilot who reads it knows exactly how long 38% lasts, about 1.5 seconds of silence, long enough for a Messerschmitt to close 300 yards and turn a cockpit into glass and wind. Outside this office, the runway smells like frost and 100 octane. Ground crew stamp their boots. A hurricane coughs itself awake, the Merlin turning over like a chest deciding to breathe or not. The sky is the color of old pewter. Somewhere to the southeast, the channel carries a rumor of wings. She's here before the lamps warm. Black coat, leather satchel, a smudge of soot along one knuckle she forgot to wipe. 32 years old, 6 years of engines, a lifetime of not waiting for permission. Beatrice Tilly Schilling runs a fingertip along the paper, stops at the word unresolved, and lets her hand fall away as if the page is hot. If you press your ear close enough to these reports, you can hear the rooms they were written in, the scrape of a chair, the click of a brass pen cap, the breath someone holds after typing cause. And you can hear something else too, beyond the paper and the neat rows of numbers, the way a man's voice changes on the radio when his engine dies, the way words break. In the hangar, a mechanic swears softly, then laughs like someone who has found an old coin in dust. "She's here," he says to nobody in particular, and the relief in his voice sounds larger than a person and smaller than a miracle. The problem is brutally simple and fatal in a way only simple things can be. Under -G, fuel slams the wrong direction in the float chamber. The jet starves. The engine dies for a heartbeat and a half. Physics keeps its promise. The German engines don't blink. Direct injection, a metal vein pushing petrol whatever the sky is doing. So our pilots roll, dive, line up a shot, and meet the oldest enemy in the world, nothing. Someone has already written a proper solution on a chalkboard 3 towns away. Pressure carburation, a full redesign, new pumps, new guts, new time. The war won't give. It will come in 1943 if luck behaves. But this morning is not 1943. This morning is the kind of cold that burns the inside of your nose, and another patrol is due to form up over Dungeon S in 20 minutes. She has brought something that doesn't look like an answer. It fits in a matchbox. A disc of brass with a hole in the center, so precisely cut it feels like it hums when you hold it. 0.04 inches. Is not a big number. It is smaller than a pencil lead. It is also the difference between a float chamber drowning and a jet sipping just enough to keep the heart beating when the sky turns upside down. "Numbers don't bleed," she once told a young technician who had apologized for getting the math wrong. "People do." She said it without cruelty and went back to the drill press. At 0742, a pilot climbs the wing root of his Hurricane and lowers himself into the cockpit with the care you use to sit beside a sleeping child. Davies, 24, 41 missions, 2 engine cuts in dives he survived by luck and muscle memory. He checks the harness. He slaps the panel twice. He looks toward the dispersal hut where a woman in a black coat has stopped pretending she isn't watching him. There is a rule book for how to solve this. It says, form a committee, write a memo, wait for authorization, test on a bench, test on a rig, test on a plane nobody needs, test in weather nobody flies. Then if the numbers still sing, consider, letting it touch a machine that will go to war. War has its own book. It says, if you can save someone in 12 minutes, do it in 11. The satchel opens. The brass washer rests on a folded rag like a coin on a prayer card. A sergeant named Cooper, 3 years of Merlins, 19 funerals, does not ask for a signature. He loosens a coupling, slides the disc between fuel pump and carburetor, kisses the joint with a butane torch. 60 seconds becomes a weld. The modification is invisible unless you know where to look, and even then it looks like nothing. You can almost hear the math through the skin of the aircraft. Full throttle flow, -G duration, the hungry little rectangle inside the engine that wants what it wants when it wants it. The numbers line up like soldiers at inspection. The numbers do not have to stand on a runway and pick a side between rules and lives. Davies thumbs the starter. The Merlin catches and then roars. All 12 cylinders arguing and agreeing at once. Oil pressure is good. Coolant is honest. Magnetos talk to each other without sarcasm. He releases the brakes and the tail lifts, and the whole machine becomes lighter than its own story. Enemy fighters active over Dungeon S, the controller says through wool and static. On the tarmac, she raises binoculars and pretends her hands aren't shaking. If you've ever watched a plane you've altered leave the ground and go looking for someone who wants to kill the man inside, you know the precise weight of helplessness. It is heavier than an engine block and lighter than silence. The file on the desk behind her will still be there when she comes back inside. Engine failures during -G dives, 38%. Cause, unresolved. It does not know about brass. It does not know about sergeants who stop asking permission. It does not know that a woman who used to race a Norton at Brooklands learned the feel of an engine the way a violinist learns the dark between notes. If history were fair, this would be the part where she is introduced by rank and title and an officer shakes her hand and says her name correctly. History is not fair. History will borrow a joke from a man in a supercharger division and make a nickname of her solution. It will stamp temporary on a fix that saves lives for 3 winters. It will take 40 years to say thank you with a medal and a photograph and then ask her to go back to work. But that is later. For now, the sky is pewter, and the channel is a rumor of wings, and a hurricane with a brass washer you cannot see is carving a line through cold air toward 2 dots nobody on the ground can yet admit are enemy or fate. And for 1.5 seconds that will not come today, an engine is about to keep a promise. At first glance, it reads like a nuisance, the sort of thing engineers circle in red and promise to address in due course. It is not a nuisance. It is a guillotine that falls sideways. Under -G, the world forgets which way is down. Fuel does too. Inside the Skinner's Union carburetor, the float that's supposed to ride a steady lake of petrol rises into air, the jet starves, and the Merlin coughs itself into a 1.5-second coma. In a laboratory, that's a blip on a graph. In a dive at 400 miles an hour, it is the sound a man hears just before he becomes the past. The German engines don't do this. The Daimler-Benz DB601 and its brothers take fuel like a pulse, pumped, pressurized, indifferent to gravity's tantrums. A Messerschmitt can half roll into a split S, pin the pilot to his harness, drop its nose like a hammer, and never lose the thread of power. Our boys learn the enemy's advantage the way you learn a hot stove, once, painfully, and then forever. Combat reports write the anomaly in neat phrases: power loss in negative flight, temporary cut during pushover, engine failure on dive initiation. The phrases are polite. The consequences are not. A Spitfire spots a 109. He has height. He has the sun. He pushes. The nose falls through the horizon, weightless for a breath, and then nothing. Silence where fury should be. The German doesn't have to be good. He only has to be awake. He pulls up, returns, and writes with Canon what physics has already drafted. There is a second anomaly, and it doesn't live in a float chamber. It lives in a corridor at Farnborough. Engineering is a set of rooms organized by certainty: the bench test room, the dynamometer room, the office where people sign their names. There is also the room no one draws on a plan, the one where an idea doesn't belong to the right sort of person. Tilly walks into that room every morning. She does not lower her voice. She isn't fighting the whole war. She's fighting a hole the size of a pencil lead. But the hole has allies: procedure, timidity, calendar pages blown off a desk and into a bin, marked later. Somewhere on a chalkboard, an immaculate solution gleams: pressure carburation. It will come with new pumps, new regulators, new paperwork, and the correct signatures. It will arrive too late for the men assembling over Dungeness this week. So the anomaly becomes a choice, and choices are where people appear. You can measure a woman by what she does with a minute no one is guarding. Tilly spends hers like contraband. In the hangar, the engines tell their truth in smells before they tell it in numbers: hot oil, raw petrol, scorched paint, breath turning to ghosts in the cold. A mechanic leans into a cowling with a torch. The light makes a small sun on the Merlin skin. "It's always the same at pushover," he says, not as complaint but as weather report. He has the look men get when they've watched the same mistake kill too many clever people. On paper, the RAF solution is patience. In the sky, patience is a crater with snow in it. The Air Ministry will approve something soon, they say. Rolls-Royce will design something permanent. Commanders nod because commanders have to nod at something. Pilots listen with the faces of men who have already made other plans. Tilly's plan doesn't advertise itself. It has no committee. It has no preface. It is a disc of brass smaller than a shilling with a hole so precise that you can feel your own pulse steady if you stare at it long enough. Limit the maximum fuel flow a breath below what full power demands, and when the world turns upside down, the flood cannot happen. The jet sips. The engine lives through the instant when gravity lies. The moment passes, power remains. "Too small and you starve it," she mutters to herself, thumb measuring what only a micrometer can see. "Too large and you drown." She has tried 17 diameters, 17 wrong answers, and one that feels like a note in tune. She machines a flat washer because simple things are harder to break, easier to hide, and quicker to teach. There is a regulation that says you can't put this inside a machine that intends to leave the ground. There is another one that says you can't put this inside a machine someone loves. There is no regulation that says you must stand on a runway and watch a man die because the test cell calendar is full. Regulations are tidy, people. They don't come to dispersal when the siren goes. Here is the paradox at the center of the anomaly. Everyone agrees the cutout exists. No one agrees to let the smallest possible fix touch the most important possible engine. The paperwork believes in perfection. The war believes in good enough by noon. She finds her witness in Sergeant Cooper, whose toolbox remembers the weight of 19 funerals. He doesn't need a lecture in fluid dynamics. He needs the next patrol to come back with all its names. He takes the fuel line loose with a motion so practiced it looks like politeness, slides the brass coin where only he and she will ever know it lives, and seals the joint with a kiss of fire that leaves a ring the color of old honey. The machine cools, then warms, then breathes. Somewhere above Kent, invisible geometry draws two lines toward each other, one from France with a black cross on its wings, one from England with a red circle on its skin. Between those lines is the old promise that whoever keeps his power the longest writes the report. Back at the desk, a different kind of line waits, typed, inked, sure of itself. Recommend awaiting full pressure carburetor solution before field modification. You can almost hear the chair creak as the author of that recommendation leans back, convinced he has said the adult thing. Perhaps he has. Adults often confuse delay with wisdom. The anomaly is not the carburetor. The carburetor is behaving exactly as designed under conditions its designers did not imagine. The anomaly is the distance between a fix that works now and a fix that will be beautiful later. 10 minutes from now, a hurricane will choose. In the cockpit, a hand will push the stick forward, the nose will fall, the pilot's stomach will rise, and the Merlin will either keep its promise or confess its old sin. History for the moment is undecided, but no matter what the report will say, whether it calls what happens next temporary improvement, unapproved alteration, or no significant change, it will forget one line, the one that explains who was willing to be wrong in public so a pilot could be alive in private. On paper, the Royal Air Force is a lattice of procedure. Requisitions climb, authorizations descend. Between them, machines go to war. In the engine department at Farnborough, the walls smell faintly of castor oil and chalk, and the notice board is crowded with good intentions, flowcharts, memos, a schedule that believes months are promises rather than guesses. There are two women in these rooms. One is a secretary whose speed at taking dictation makes men feel efficient. The other is Beatrice Schilling, who makes some of the same men feel something else entirely. She doesn't dress like a disruption. She arrives, hangs her coat, ties her hair back, and reaches for tools that remember her hands. But the anomaly no bench can measure hums under everything. Who is allowed to touch what saves lives? If you read the correspondence from that winter, and I have, you find a particular kind of politeness. It's the tone people use when they think history will read over their shoulder. While Miss Schilling's proposal has merit, it is the opinion of this office that a comprehensive permanent solution is preferable to piecemeal modification. The sentence is tidy. The snow outside is not. Rolls-Royce is already drawing the elegant answer: pressure carburation, regulated flow, a cathedral of small precisions that will not blink when the pilot does. No one doubts it will work. Everyone doubts the calendar, tooling, tolerances, training. Every beautiful thing needs time, and time is a luxury in a winter where pilots count their friends in the past tense. The RAF isn't cruel, it is careful. Care has saved as many lives as courage, but care can harden into ritual, and ritual can forget why it began. In 1940, changing the fuel to 100 octane won speed at the cost of a flaw nobody had mapped. In 1941, the flaw is a throat clearing in the minutes before combat, the moment the engine decides whether to be an ally or an alibi. Procedure asks for patience. The channel asks for proof. There is another system, older than the Air Ministry's rubber stamps. It has fewer rules and more reflex. It lives in workshops where men with burned fingers fix planes at 02 Hankook under blackout curtains. It lives in flight lines where a corporal can hear a sticky magneto before the gauges confess. It lives in the way ground crews stand a pace closer to a pilot than rank requires when he climbs down after a landing that used every inch of runway. This system recognizes authority by competence, not stationary. Schilling learned that language racing at Brooklands. The track didn't ask whether she belonged. It asked whether she could finish a lap at a speed that scared sensible people. The gold star she earned wasn't a certificate. It was a sentence. She understands engines where it matters, in the corner, under load, when the machine shows you what you missed. You don't debate that in a meeting. You either know it or you don't. Inside the ministry, the problem shows up as diagrams: float chamber, needle, seat, pressures annotated in neat ink. The diagrams are right. They are also incomplete. They do not draw the weightlessness of a pushover, the way your stomach detaches and comes back late, the sound a 12-cylinder makes when it forgets itself. They do not draw the German pilot who has learned to time his return fire to the exact length of our silence. Bias doesn't announce itself as bias. It arrives dressed as prudence. Field modifications invite inconsistency, one memo says. Inexperienced hands may do harm. That's true. Inexperienced hands have already done harm by writing rules that assume the sky will pause for paperwork. The experienced hands are waiting by a fuel line with a washer so small you could hide it under a coin. I wish I could tell you there was a meeting where someone stood up and said, "Gentlemen, we are confusing the permanent with the necessary." I wish I could tell you there was a room that listened. The truth is smaller and braver. A sergeant with 19 funerals on his back makes a weld he is not paid to make. A woman with a Norton's engine in her memory does the math in her head and refuses to treat brass like blasphemy. Context is the story we tell ourselves to excuse delay. War is the moment that deletes context and asks what you can carry with both hands in the next 10 minutes. There is also the matter of names. Read the rolls of honor, and you'll find pilots, squadrons, aircraft types, places. Read the engineering minutes and you'll find Miss Schilling bracketed by titles and acronyms, her contributions diluted by grammar. When the fix spreads from station to station, men will nickname it with the sort of crude humor armies use to keep fear somewhere they can laugh at it. The name will stick harder than the original drawing number. It will not say who burned her fingers, making a washer that keeps a promise. I can almost hear her voice in those rooms, low, unhurried, precise. She doesn't argue the politics. She argues the physics, flow rates, orifice size, cavitation risk, full power margin. She draws a circle the size of a wedding ring and asks the only question that matters: will this keep him alive when the world turns over? In another file, the pressure carb timeline advances, requisition placed, tooling underway, trials projected. It will come. It should come. The permanent answer is not the enemy. But permanence has a blind spot. It cannot imagine the grace of a good stopgap. It cannot imagine that the most moral thing you can do today is prevent one funeral while you wait to prevent all of them tomorrow. History likes clean arrows from problem to solution. Real life is a braid. The 0.04-inch washer is one strand. The pressure carburetor is another. The courage to fly again because something tiny made you trust your engine, that's the third. Try to pull one without the others and the rope fails where you need it strongest. The system will take credit later. Contracts signed, standards updated, manuals amended. Manuals are very brave in hindsight. In foresight, bravery looks like a small torch flame on a cold morning and a signature nobody asked for because the sky did not grant time for signatures. The last memo on the stack that week says, "Recommend continued evaluation." The word "continued" is doing too much work. Evaluation is important, so is the fact that two dots over the channel are converging, and one of them knows exactly when our engine stops singing. Which is why the real context of this story isn't gender or bureaucracy or even technology. It's a choice about what kind of truth you believe in when you don't have enough future to be elegant. She closes the file. She picks up the satchel. Cooper is already rolling a trolley toward dispersal. The runway is a sheet of pewter, and the air tastes like metal. Numbers will sit where they are until someone moves them. People won't. The washer is ready, the math is merciless, and someone still has to decide whether a hole the size of a pencil lead is big enough to hold a life. The map says the sky is geometry. Bearings in pencil, altitudes in clean circles, a tidy ladder of waypoints climbing toward France. The men know better. The sky is breath and noise, and seconds you can spend only once. She lays the washer flat on her palm, as if weighing a coin she will never spend. 0.04 inches, a number you can hide in a whisper. It is not much of a shield, not much of a prayer, and yet when she slides it back into the satchel, it feels heavier than the file that tried to ignore it. On the flight line, Cooper is already where he always is, half a step ahead of what the engine will ask for. His hands carry a catalog of burns and small white scars that read like a resume to anyone who knows how to read skin. He doesn't announce belief. He shows it, a nod, a towel thrown over a cowling, the small economy of motion men have when they're done pretending that hope is something separate from work. Davies checks the canopy seal with a thumb, the way a man presses a door he's locked twice already. His eyes have that thin brightness of someone waiting to be disappointed and trying not to let the room see. He doesn't know what she and the sergeant welded into his fuel line. He doesn't know he's become the test everyone else was afraid to write down. What he knows is that the last 2 times he pushed the stick, the world went quiet and came back with teeth. Numbers arranged themselves in her head without asking. Full power demand, margin, flow through an orifice when the world turns over. They make a kind of music, and for a moment, just a moment, she lets herself believe that if she hums it softly enough, the engine will hear. The taxiway is a gray ribbon. The Hurricane noses forward, tail lightening, propeller turning the morning into a blur. Wheels off. A small affirmation travels down the runway and into the bones of everyone who watches an airplane leave. Flight is still possible. In a war, you never take that for granted. The radio cracks, fusses, and then obeys. 3 aircraft, standard formation, south to the water. 2 bandits, Angels 1-4, the controller says after a while, voice thin with cold and distance. That word, bandits, turns men into angles and timing and outcomes. The math sharpens. Closing speed, sun position, dive angle. The old problem waiting with its old grin at the top of the pushover. There is a kind of courage that burns hot and throws sparks. This isn't that. This is the quiet kind, the kind that lives in wrists and eyes and breath control. Davies lowers the nose. Gravity lets go of him. Weight falls off his shoulders, off the stick, off the Merlin's crank like a promise the world isn't sure it intends to keep. Half a heartbeat, the length of a word you never say aloud. Then, no cough, no stutter, no sudden emptiness where power should be. The prop bite is continuous, the note clean, the engine making a sound like relief learned to sing. He rides it down the last 200 yards. Tracers arrive too late from the 109's wing routes. He answers with a 3-second burst that walks from the enemy's left route to the aileron. The Messerschmitt flinches, breaks right, decides that France is an idea worth pursuing, and leaves the conversation in a hurry. The second one follows. Because sometimes even men with advantages can feel a story turn and choose not to argue with it. Up above the runway where she is not, Tilly's chest finally remembers how to move again. She's been holding her breath without noticing, as if air is something you must ration until Data comes home. Cooper laughs, a low, unbelieving sound that tries to be careful and fails. It is the first time laughter has come near this problem in months without sounding like a dare. "Best she's ever run," Davy says on the ground later, helmet off, hair damp with cold. He is not a poet. He's not trying to be gracious. He is saying the truest sentence he has today. What happens next is not dramatic. It is repetitive on purpose. Another hurricane goes up with a coin of brass no one will ever see. Then a Spitfire. Then 4 more. Reports trickle in that don't know their history yet. No cut in pushover. Pressed attack. Engine continuous under negative load. The words are plain because plain is what you write when you are relieved and tired and beginning to trust something you can't quite name. There is a physics to trust. It accumulates. A pilot who lost a friend to silence pushes 5 degrees harder, 2 seconds longer. A section leader who used to call "break off" at the first hiccup holds his breath and keeps his men in the dive. The small, careful courage of people who have been punished for optimism begins to stand up straight again. She does the other math too, the cost counted in metal and time. A washer takes less than a minute to fit if your hands already know where they're going. It requires no new spares, no new manuals, no lecture. It asks only for a decision. The arithmetic of mercy is often that simple. How many small acts can you do before noon? When she finally sits, hours later, she doesn't collapse. She lowers herself as if the chair has become part of the experiment and must be treated with respect. The file is still on the desk. The line about 38% is steady and indifferent as ever. She looks at it with an expression that might be called tenderness if you didn't know better. She is not in love with the problem. She is in love with the moment a problem lets go. And yet nothing inside her becomes grand. There are no speeches waiting behind her teeth. If anyone asks how she knew, she will shrug and describe fluid through a hole, the way a violinist might talk about a bow. She will not say the thing you can hear even if she never speaks it, that sometimes the human part of engineering is a promise you make in private to people you will never meet. Outside, the sun decides to be a pallor instead of a rumor. Frost shrugs off the wing leading edges like someone shedding a bad idea. In the distance, a truck backfires, and a man swears with a kind of joy because even noise means life. Do you measure this victory by the angle of a dive and the length of a burst? You could. You could draw it in chalk across a blackboard and point to where the curve no longer falls away at pushover. But there is another measurement to consider. The way ground crew stand a fraction closer to the aircraft as it taxis in, as if proximity itself can add a second to a life. The way a pilot's shoulders ease before he takes his first step back to Earth. It would be easy to call the washer a stopgap and leave it there. It would be easy to say the permanent solution is coming and let that be the story. The truth is kinder and more complicated. The washer is a human answer to a human problem. It is what you do when the right thing is not available and the wrong thing is the law of gravity. It is the courage to be small and correct right now. When Davies turns to go, he pauses. He looks at Cooper, then at her. Something unpracticed passes between them, the shape of gratitude without the ceremony. "Whatever you did," he says, "do it to all of them." And just like that, the math has a multiplication sign. She nods, not because she needs permission, but because the sentence recognizes the only equation that matters. One becomes many, and many become fewer funerals. Later, much later, a nickname will follow the washer around with a grin. It will make people smirk. It will do what nicknames do, file off the edges of reverence so the miracle can be handled without breaking. She won't mind. She will be busy tracing a list of stations on a map, drawing a route for a motorcycle that has carried her over faster lines than these, planning how to spend the next week turning a small circle of brass into time. If you listen closely as the hangar doors roll shut, you can hear the engine notes of airplanes you will never know leaving and returning in the dark. You can also hear beneath them a quieter music, numbers aligning with breath until they sound like the same thing. The day begins with frost on the grass and the low growl of engines already awake. By now, the rumor of her brass washer has traveled faster than any memo could. Pilots whisper about the miracle fix. Mechanics smile like they know a secret that can't be put into words. At Biggin Hill, the air smells of petrol and damp canvas. The sky is a shallow blue that looks breakable. A dozen hurricanes wait like greyhounds on the line, exhausts shivering with heat. Tilly stands beside one of them, her coat collar turned up against the wind. She is small against the plane's flank, almost invisible next to the men in flight gear. Yet the moment she steps closer to the engine cowling, every man nearby notices her. They might not know her name, but they know the rumor, the woman who made the Merlin breathe again. Group Captain Grace meets her with a handshake that lasts longer than custom. "We lost 7 in 2 months," he says, not as complaint, just as arithmetic. "Let's make sure we stop counting." She opens the satchel. The sound of brass against cloth is so faint it might as well be prayer. 6 restrictors, gleaming under a thin veil of oil. She lays them on a workbench one by one. Each catches the morning light like a promise made of metal. The ground crews move with reverence, disguised as speed. 4 aircraft at a time, 12 minutes each. Disconnect, fit, weld, reconnect, test. She checks every joint herself. The smell of burnt flux mixes with coffee and sweat. For a while, war becomes a pattern of torches and patience. When she finishes the 50th installation that day, her hands are blackened, but her eyes are bright. It's the brightness of someone who knows the math now belongs to the sky. That afternoon, the patrols go up. 4 planes, then 6, then 10. She stands at the edge of the tarmac with her binoculars, watching small crosses become specks, then disappear into cloud. Silence. The kind that stretches until it becomes a weight. Every crew on the ground feels it pressing against their ribs. Then, faint but certain, the radios start to talk. Hurricanes engaging, no engine loss. Repeat, no engine loss. Her fingers close around the binoculars until the leather creaks. A voice comes through clearer now, calm and almost casual. Engine ran smooth through the dive, confirmed hits, returning to base. No celebration, no cheer, just the plain speech of men who have run out of disbelief. They land 40 minutes later. 3 of the pilots are still grinning when they climb down, the kind of grin that looks half like shock, half like gratitude. Davies is among them. He walks straight to her, still carrying his gloves, the smell of cordite and oil following him. "Ran like a dream," he says simply. "Dove through the whole fight. Never missed a beat." She nods once. The world wobbles in her vision, the way it does when a tension you didn't know you'd been carrying finally lets go. Cooper hands her a rag, and she wipes the soot from her palms. For a moment, the hangar is quiet except for the ticking of cooling engines. Even the wind holds still, as if the air itself is listening. That's when she realizes it. The silence doesn't sound the same anymore. It's not the silence of failure or waiting. It's the silence after a promise kept. Davies looks back at his plane. "Put it in all of them," he says, like an order disguised as gratitude. "Every Hurricane, every Spitfire, no man flies without it." She doesn't smile. She only nods again, because she understands what that means. The fix has stopped being an experiment. It's become a lifeline. In that small corner of England, something irreversible has happened. The engineers will call it Miss Schilling's orifice. The pilots will laugh about it in pubs, on airfields, over black coffee and trembling hands. The humor will make it easier to say. The laughter will hide the reverence they can't admit. She will let them. Because the laughter means they're still alive to make it. When the day fades, she sits on the step outside the hangar, watching the last glow die behind the trees. The runway lights flicker on, blue and dim. Somewhere above, another patrol climbs through thin clouds, every engine carrying a small piece of her stubbornness. If you listen close, you can almost hear them. A chorus of 12-cylinder hearts, still beating because one woman refused to wait for permission. And in that moment, when even the sky seems to hold its breath, the war itself feels a little less infinite. By the end of March, the rumor has become routine. Pilots no longer ask if the washer works, they ask when they're getting one. At 40 stations across southern England, ground crews work by torchlight, sliding thin coins of brass into engines that have stopped betraying their pilots. A fix that began in a single hangar now moves like a quiet faith. The Air Ministry notices. It always does, eventually. Reports arrive from squadrons across 11 group. No negative G cutouts, combat dives successful, enemy losses increased. Someone in a London office draws a line under the numbers and writes, "Recommend rapid standardization of restrictor." Just like that, what began as an act of disobedience becomes official doctrine. Factories at Derby and Crewe are told to machine 500 pieces a week. Rolls-Royce engineers receive a copy of her drawing, still smudged with pencil. One of them laughs and says, "Brilliant, utterly improper, but brilliant." They give it a name that sounds like a joke and a compliment at once. Miss Schilling's orifice. It will stick longer than her real one. She doesn't flinch when she hears it. Soldiers cope with fear through humor. Engineers cope with awe the same way. If crude laughter keeps men alive, she'll take it. The statistics prove what words cannot. Engine failures in dives drop from nearly 40% to less than 1. Pilots press attacks they would have abandoned. The Luftwaffe's own after-action reports mention improved British pursuit tactics and persistent enemy aircraft maintaining negative G maneuvers. The advantage the Germans once owned has evaporated, and nobody can explain why. Nobody but her. She spends the following months on the road, riding her Norton from base to base, a satchel full of washers strapped behind her. 43 stations in all. Mud, rain, petrol, cold sandwiches eaten by the roadside. Everywhere she goes, the ground crews call her Tilly, and the pilots shake her hand like someone blessing a relic. There is no ceremony, no photograph, no headline, only the smell of oil and the steady rhythm of engines that no longer stutter. At Farnborough, the administrators signed the paperwork months later, crediting the modification to RA Engineering Division. Her name is buried under 3 lines of initials. The brass disc that saved hundreds of pilots becomes just another part number in a ledger. When Rolls-Royce finally perfects the pressure carburetor 2 years later, it will enter production with applause and headlines. They will call it the permanent solution. Nobody will mention that its predecessor, the little washer from Kenley, stayed in service until 1944 because no one wanted to fly without it. History is generous with machines and stingy with the hands that made them work. In 1948, when the medals are handed out and the war is something people tell stories about, she stands quietly among men who outrank her and hears her title read, Officer of the Order of the British Empire. The newspaper photographs catch her smile, but not the look that follows. A small, private acknowledgement that what truly mattered never asked for a medal. At home, the washer sits in a drawer beside a Norton spark plug and a pair of old racing gloves. It's darkened with oil and fingerprints, and when the light hits it, you can still see the ghost of a weld line that held steady through 3 years of war. People will remember the planes, the dogfights, the victories drawn in white contrails across the Scant. Very few will remember that those contrails exist because someone once refused to wait for permission. The official file calls her design a temporary measure. But the word temporary lies. It lasted long enough for thousands of men to come home. And in a quiet way, that's the kind of permanence no archive can erase. The war ends with a silence so wide it almost feels wrong. Engines cool, airfields empty. The sky, once crowded with noise and fire, turns blue again and stays that way. Tilly goes back to Farnborough because she doesn't know how to stop working. The lab is quieter now. The same corridors that once shook with urgency feel too clean. She builds new systems for cold weather starts, studies icing and Arctic fuel lines, drafts equations for high-altitude mixtures. It's still about survival, just not as loud anymore. Every so often, a young engineer walks past her bench and does a double take. They've heard the stories, the woman who rode a motorcycle through blackout England, the one who put a washer in the world's most famous engine and didn't ask for permission. They expect arrogance. They find a woman who still wipes her tools before she goes home. George, her husband, comes back from his own war with the same silence she carries. They never talk about it. They don't need to. Some people share language, others share what's left when words stop working. Decades slide by. The new generation of aircraft use fuel injection, jets, rockets. The world climbs higher, faster, until the old propeller planes seem almost quaint. But somewhere, in every museum that still keeps a Hurricane polished for display, the mechanics know there's a piece inside the fuel line the manuals barely mention. They keep it there out of respect, like a tiny heartbeat trapped in brass. When she retires in 1969, the notice is brief. Miss Beatrice Schilling, OBE, retires after 33 years of service. No mention of how many pilots lived because of her stubbornness. No mention of how close she came to being court-martialed for disobedience. No mention that she taught the RAF what courage looks like when it's written in thousandths of an inch. History likes big things, wingspans, battles, medals, but the truth is smaller, humbler. Sometimes it's a woman at a lathe turning a piece of brass that will hold back death for just long enough to matter. Years later, when she dies quietly at 81, the obituaries call her the engineer behind Miss Schilling's orifice. The phrase makes people smile without knowing why. They don't realize that behind the humor was a lesson, that elegance and defiance can fit in the same breath, and that sometimes the simplest thing you can do is also the bravest. If you stand close enough to one of those old Merlins and listen, really listen, you can still hear her work. The even rhythm, the refusal to falter. That's her signature. Not ink, not a medal, sound. Maybe that's the real definition of legacy, when what you fixed keeps running after you've stopped. And maybe history doesn't need heroes carved in stone. Maybe it just needs people who refuse to vanish, people who looked at a line that said unresolved and decided to prove it wrong. If this story reaches 10,000 hands that still believe small ideas can save lives, then her name and her brass washer will never fade again.